You recognize that you're not the physical body. You recognize that you are not the mind. Who are you then if you are not those things? You are an emanation of light, an emanation of source energy itself. Take all of that out into the world so that you can become this emanation or expression of that soul frequency that is starting to move through you. It's not as important what you do in terms of action or the role that you play. That's not as important as the energy or the emanation. So we say focus on the energy or the emanation first. We like to describe it as you're becoming a light bulb. Your physicality is becoming a sort of transparent light bulb so that the energy that is the true you can shine through.
What are some of the most common experiences that someone would have as this awakening begins?
Well, oftentimes it's described as unfolding in phases or stages, which is very true because you would understand that that shift in frequency is something that does have to occur over a period of time. In other words, a sudden shift in energy or a sudden shift in of frequency would almost be overwhelming or too much for your physical symptoms to really process. And so when you think of ascension or spiritual awakening and the stages, understand first of all that the reason for that is that so there can be a more gradual acclimation of this shift in energy or shift in frequency that the physical body can become accustomed to so that there is not a sense of shock. So we would say that the process is different for everyone, but we would say there are some commonalities. The first being that usually a being's first sense of spiritual awakening is the recognition or the sense that who they are is not the physical body. So they may have a dream or they may have an out of body experience or some sort of spiritual experience which separates their consciousness from their physicality. So they have an experience where they're not experiencing life through this physical body. And as a result of that experience, the realization is that they are not, their identity is not this physicality. Their identity is this consciousness or this awareness that exists separate from the physicality. Usually that is the first phase for most beings. And so that can occur suddenly or that can occur over a period of many moments in time. It depends on the experience. Some beings have what you would call a near death experience, which results in a very sudden realization that who they are is not the physicality. But some beings have a series of more subtle experiences that show them that their identity is beyond the physical. So that usually is the first realization or the first stage. And then, of course, as they proceed down the path, there's a second realization that can occur either simultaneously to that awareness of the identity not being the physical body, but oftentimes the second realization happens at a later date. Of course, that second realization is that not only are they not the physical body, but they are also not the mind. So they begin to recognize that mind, or what we refer to as the mental construct, as a sort of software program or software system that is running within the human construct, but that too is not their identity. So they begin to see and sense this stream of thoughts that is often never ending, right? Cycling on repeat. But if they can distance themselves from that cycle of thoughts or that stream of thoughts, they also have this recognition, again, of being more the observer. So they can see and sense the thoughts, but they are not, their identity is not the thoughts or the stream of thinking. And so there are these series of awakening experiences that a being has in relation to, number one, not being the physical body, and number two, not being the mind in terms of their identity. And so, of course, the realization, if I'm not the body and if I'm not the mind, then who or what am I? And asking that question when you are in the midst of these experiences is very powerful, to start asking that question, who am I beyond this human construct? And so, again, we would say we would put those phases into those categories, not the body, not the mind. And again, that can happen either very rapidly, but for most people, it happens over the course of many experiences that sort of integrate that knowing into their system. So it's not just a belief or thought that I am a soul. It's a knowing, it's an integration, it's based on an experience, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And I feel like I look back and what you've just shared opens the doors for so many other experiences to come and ways to manage or work through it and flow through things. And so I'm curious what you would share about the emotional state. So you spoke about physical body and the mental aspect.
Yes.
And yeah,
So in regards to the emotional body, what's true, first of all, from our perspective, is that the emotional body, which is an energy field that permeates the physical body, the emotional body and the mental body are very much intertwined, interconnected, inseparable. And so oftentimes what is happening from our perspective is that the thought forms that are anchored within the mental body are showing up in terms of frequencies of energy in the emotional body, and the physical body feels those frequencies, and those frequencies are expressed as an emotional tone or an emotional feeling. So, on this process or on this path of spiritual awakening or ascension, whatever you wish to call it, what's true is that oftentimes there is a very common experience of an emotional purging or emotional release. That is a very big part of the awakening process, the ascension process. And what that really is that when there is the realization that a being is not their mind, then all of those thought forms that are dense or heavy or associated with the more dominant lower states of consciousness or the dominant thought forms of the collective, all of those start to be purged out of the system. And the way that a being experiences that on an emotional level is a sort of emotional purging or emotional release. And of course, this is why it's so important to, as your guides have said, it's so important to honor whatever emotional frequencies are coming up and feel them fully and let them process through the system. Because if you don't do that, then what's true is that you are not only hanging on to the emotional frequencies, but you're also not letting, you're preventing the release of those denser thought forms from being released from your field if you're not willing to explore and feel your emotions, if that makes sense.
it does. Yes, thank you. And I could see where that would affect the physical body. And so I'm curious when things are flowing beautifully, what are some of the symptoms or experiences one would have, if you want to say, as an aspect of ascension and the spiritual awakening, whatever space we want to come from, but physical body, what is, or what would we experience that is something pleasurable or beneficial? It
Yep,
kind of
so
comes
there
down to.
there are many different physical symptoms that you would have as a result of this ascension process. One of the more common ones is fatigue. Now, we understand that you may not necessarily think of that as a positive experience. However, if you give yourself permission to rest, then it can be a very positive experience, because what's true is that your body, your physical body, is trying to adjust to all of these shifts that are taking place energetically, and that process can be very fatiguing for the physicality, for the physical body. And so as long as you're giving yourself permission to rest and to actually notice from moment to moment or day to day, to ask yourself, how am I feeling on this day? And when a day arises where you feel like you need rest and you give yourself permission to take that rest, then that can be a very enjoyable experience, right? It's when you try to push yourself, when you know you're feeling tired, when you know that you're in need of rest, and yet you try to push through, right, and continue on at a usual pace, that symptom is uncomfortable. But we would say, if you keep in mind that what your body needs is rest Your body also needs hydration. Your body also needs minerals. So, drinking coconut water or things with minerals or electrolytes, um, just honor whatever it is that your physical body needs as a result of this experience. An interesting side effect or symptom to ascension that some may experience is also a shift in eye color. And what's interesting is that Karen's eyes are now very green, whereas if you look at a photo of her from 10 years ago or 20 years ago, they were always hazel, but they had more of a brown tone. And over the course of time, they've become very green. So you may find that you have sort of interesting shifts in eye color or interesting birthmarks that pop up as a result. And of course, this is all to do with your physicality starting to reflect more of your soul frequency, your soul energy, as your physicality starts to mirror your actual soul energy rather than your human mental constructs that are the dominant mental constructs in this reality. You are either vibrating in harmony with that, or you are vibrating in harmony with your soul frequency, or you are somewhere on that spectrum. But as you move closer into alignment with your soul frequency, then you will experience the evidence of that physically.
Wow. Oh, that's so cool. We love to see the physical things here as a human. Um,
Well, it is proof that something is actually unfolding, right? Because many of you will have these experiences and you may have physical symptoms, but what's also common is that emotion of doubt. Am I really experiencing this? Am I really going through this? And so we would say don't forget to affirm yourself and recognize whatever it is that you're feeling, that is an accurate feeling. And so honor your feeling, honor your intuition, and know that whatever you are experiencing is actually happening. You're not imagining it.
yeah. Oh, I feel this. Yes. And it brings me to this other question about so far we've been talking about what we experience at an individual level. And I'm feeling there's messages around what happens in the world outside of us and how we would see like signs or symbols or physical manifestations that can remind us that we're not making it all up and we are supported. Could you speak to that?
Yes, so remember first of all that you're all surrounded by a team of guides and guardians that are assisting you from other dimensions, other planes of reality. Now you can't always see those guides and guardians, but you can sense them and feel them, right? So they are interacting with you on a subtle energy level, and so you can feel them. But one way they can interact with you or show signs to you is by interacting in your physical reality. One of the most common interactions being you seeing a certain number repeated on a clock or on a billboard or on a license plate, or you experience a sort of synchronicity where you're receiving the same message. This just happened to Karen today. You're receiving the exact same message, but it comes through multiple people in unrelated events, unrelated circumstances. Perhaps a friend gives you just a brief word or piece of advice, and then someone completely unrelated to them gives you the same message. And so, just noticing the synchronicity that's unfolding. Synchronicity is also a sign that you are shifting into a higher perspective or a higher level of consciousness. Where what's actually happening is it's physical evidence of your interconnection, of this energetic reality that you can't see or sense with your physical senses, but you know is there because you're having these very interesting experiences. Now, it also makes your journey a little bit lighter and a little bit more playful and a little bit more fun. So we would say honor when you get those messages through your physical reality or you're experiencing synchronicity in terms of messages. And one thing that we've advised Karen to do is to really pay attention when you receive that message that is repeating. Once you receive that message 3 times in a row, you really want to start honoring that that's a valid message that you likely want to take action upon, right? If you receive the message and you ignore it, but then you receive it 2 more times from different people or different situations, different circumstances, and you want to honor Okay, yes, I heard the message. I'm receiving the message, and it will give you confidence to move forward and take action upon that message.
Yes. I've had this experience as well. I think many of us can relate. So thank you for reminding us for sure. Um, Many who are new to the terminology or, they're awakening, they're feeling called to look into what's happening. Question, how long is this going to take? I'd love for you
Well,
to
we
share your thoughts.
That's a very sweet question. It's a cute question, and we've received that question before, not just in relation to this topic, but other topics. So we would say, first of all, when that question arises, how long is this going to take? How long is ascension going to take? How long is fill in the blank going to take? We smile at that and we ask you to notice who or what is asking that question, because what's true is that usually it's your mind or your mental construct that's asking that question, how long is this going to take? And it's often out of a perspective of wanting to be somewhere else, not
Mm.
honoring the present moment and what's arising in the present moment, but wanting to be somewhere in the future where the situation or the circumstance is different, or where there's an improved emotional tone, right? So it's very sweet when that question arises. What you want to do is you want to start wrapping that aspect of yourself with love and compassion, because that is an aspect of yourself that's very uncomfortable with this process or with whatever's unfolding in the moment, and it's seeking to escape the present moment and find a point in time in the future where everything is sorted out. So we would say, first of all, what's interesting about your physical reality is there never really is a point in the future where you arrive at and you have everything sorted out, because you are this eternal being that is here for the purpose of exploration, that is here for the purpose of joy. And so this is a continuing unfoldment. And so with the process of ascension, or with the process of awakening, it's the same thing. There isn't a point in time where it's done, it's completed, it's a journey, it's an evolution. But we would say, if you are in that space of asking how long it's going to take, then what's likely true is that you are not in the space of enjoying the unfoldment or enjoying the process. So we would say, rather than let the mind ask how long is this going to take, you could ask the mind, or you could pose the question, how can I make this more enjoyable? And what's true is that the process of evolution, or the process of ascension, the process of spiritual awakening, can be very enjoyable and very fun. The key to that lies in starting to really peer into your mind, your mental construct, and notice the sensation of relief that occurs when you notice a false belief or a false thought form or something you've been holding in your mental body that is not true, and you release that. There's such a feeling of lightness and such a feeling of love and such a feeling of appreciation and gratitude that unfolds after that, that you realize this really is a process that can be enjoyable if I focus on how good that feels. If I focus on the relief of releasing what I am not and releasing what is not true that I've been holding on to, and I feel the lightness and the expansion after. That in and of itself is a sort of enjoyable sensation that you can focus on, so that you're no longer asking how long it's going to take, but instead you're noticing what is enjoyable about this process. And notice that your mind has these two options. You can decide to think of it as a sort of very irritating, uncomfortable experience if you're focusing on what it's uncomfortable, or you could decide to look at it as an enjoyable experience and notice what is bringing you joy about the process. So you always have that choice when it comes to the mind. So how you decide to perceive the ascension process will determine how you experience it. And we would say, so focus on what you're appreciating about that process.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I love this description. And a question that's coming up as you're sharing all of this is regarding our ancestral energies. So, whether it be thoughts or emotions or physical challenges. Can you speak to that?
Yes, so ancestral energies generally when we are thinking of ancestral healing, quote unquote ancestral healing, the way that we perceive it and the way that we think of it and the way that we advise you to go about moving forward when you're thinking of ancestral healing is to notice that when you are born into a family and when you are born into a family line, generally there tends to be this notion of taking on the thought forms, the beliefs, the perspectives, and the energies of those that you are surrounded by. So you incarnate into this family. And of course, your mind is very delicate and very young, and you start taking on these thought forms as if they were true without questioning them. And of course, this is because your young mind is not capable of discernment in those early moments. And so whatever is fed to you or whatever is projected at you in terms of thought forms and energy, you take those to be true. And so oftentimes what happens is without that experience of spiritual awakening, in other words, without that experience or that realization that I am not my mind, and since I am not my mind, I can make choices in terms of what thought forms I hold. When that experience is not present, there is this cycling of thought forms from generation to generation. So, in other words, a being is born into a family that carries a certain collective of thought forms. They do not question those thought forms. And so, as they grow older and they have a family of their own, the cycle of those thought forms perpetuate. Are you understanding what we're saying?
Yeah, yeah.
And so the spiritual awakening aspect is really important because what's happening truly in a spiritual awakening is that cyclical nature of energies that are being perpetuated through thought forms is interrupted by one who is born into that environment, but who at some point in their life experience starts to question those thought forms. And so rather than take them all as true, there's this awakening that happens, this awakening, this realization that I'm not the mind and I can choose what to think and I don't have to perpetuate these thought forms of my family line. And so there's an interruption, and we would say a healing that occurs based on that person's realization that they have the capacity to choose how they want to perceive themselves, how they want to perceive others, how they want to perceive the world, and it's a deliberate conscious choice. And so there's this sort of holographic, we think of it as dominoes. If you visualize dominoes knocking over, there's this sort of healing that takes place energetically both for the person in the present moment, but also across all timelines and even into the past, right? Because
Yeah.
this experience of time is, although it's very real to you in this reality, it is in other realms, it's sort of an illusion. There is no time as you experience it in other realms. And so, this notion of healing thought forms that gets affected backwards in time like dominoes. And so there's this healing that takes place across all timelines, across all dimensions. So it's a very powerful time to incarnate with regards to ancestral healing because many of those listening to this message are the ones that have purposefully incarnated to break cycles and shift energy. And how they do that is by questioning all of those thought forms that they've been conditioned to believe are true at a very young age. And so that completely shifts energy not only for them, but obviously for their future descendants, because that line of energy that is manifesting in the form of thought has been disrupted. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, and I have a big smile on my face because earlier when you were talking about focusing on, like, the joy of releasing energy and being present in the moment, it just reminds me of when we do release this ancestral programming or thought that's been with our family for generations, how enjoyable that can be, and it's like a
Yes, well,
celebration.
and it trickles through in terms of your physical reality and your physical manifestation, so you can't deeply shift those programmed thoughts without starting to have a different experience in your physical reality, right? Because your reality is just mirroring your energy field at all moments in time. So if you're feeling or if you're experiencing some sort of constraint or some sort of limitation, that's a beautiful indication that you're holding something in your energy field that is not true, either about
Mhm.
yourself or about others or about the world in general. So it's a very liberating experience, and yes, it can be very pleasurable. It can be
Yeah.
very enjoyable in terms of actually experiencing first that energy shift, which feels like a sort of lightness taking over where there was density in the past. And then, of course, the shift in your reality, which starts to create circumstances that bring you more joy.
Yes. Yes. And is there anything else that you wanted to share? Are there any other aspects to the stages of the spiritual awakening?
Well, we would say so we've spoken about the stage of recognizing that you're not the body, then there's the stage of recognizing that you're not the mind, and we would say after that, I mean, the stages continue, but we talk about those because those are the ones that are most important at this time in terms of recognition. But after you have made those recognitions, of course, when it comes to the mind, that is a sort of continual process because you're always working with your mind as a tool. And
Mhm.
sometimes those old thought forms that you feel like you've released can sneak up again. And it's just another layer that you need to work on. But we would say after you've sort of anchored those two stages, then the third stage is when you start to take all of that out into the world so that you can become this emanation or expression of that soul frequency that is starting to move through you because of course you've cleared your energy enough so that that light or that true identity can start to move through you. Now, we said before, and we'll remind you that it's not as important what you do in terms of action or the role that you play. That's not as important as the energy or the emanation. So we say focus on the energy or the emanation first. Make sure that when you examine your state of being, that you feel uplifted, that you feel joy, that you feel energy moving through you. And then once you have sort of anchored that as your dominant state of being, then the way forward in terms of action or in terms of what role that you're meant to play, all of that will come to you. You're not going to have to go looking for it. It will be obvious how you're meant to share this energy that is the true you with the world. So we would say that is a sort of simplified version in terms of the stages as we see it. Of course, you can always, if you are researching or looking online, you can find much more complicated versions of these stages, but we are fans of keeping it very simple. So again, if you were to break that down, it would be you recognize that you're not the physical body, you recognize that you are not the mind, and of course, along with that, you're not the emotional body, you're not the personality. Who are you then if you're not those things? You are an emanation of light, an emanation of source energy itself. As you recognize that and anchor that, and you become a sort of, we like to describe it as you're becoming a light bulb. Your physicality, your human construct is becoming a sort of transparent light bulb so that the energy that is the true you can shine through. And then you start to focus on that. You focus on being an emanation, right? But you don't need to go out searching for how you're going to do that. It will be obvious, right?
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. Wow, this has been a wonderful conversation, a lot of information to share. As we close, was there any last message that you have?
We would just say that we are so grateful for all of your dedication, your devotion, your participation, your willingness to interact. And we're speaking to you individually, and we're speaking to all of those listening. There's a sort of eagerness that we can sense and feel, a devotion to the light. And we'd say that is very important at this time because, of course, you want to keep your focus on the light. There's so much chaos and so many lower frequencies that could grab your attention at any moment. If you can focus on the light that you are, focus on your purpose of being an emanation of that light, that will keep you buoyant, keep you elevated, and also bring you great joy. So we would say thank you so much for this interaction. As always, we leave you with the greeting Sat Nam, meaning true identity. We hold that frequency of your true identity and we beam and broadcast that back to you in all moments in time. And so Satnam to you on this day.
Satnam. Thank you, Satnam.